The House Judiciary Committee hearing room crackled with tension as Chairman Jim Jordan's gavel came down with unusual force. The sharp crack echoing through the chamber, his face was flushed with visible frustration as he leaned toward his microphone. "The gentlewoman from Texas is out of order," Jordan declared, his voice rising sharply. "This hearing is about federal overreach, not a platform for partisan attacks on committee members." The C-SPAN cameras caught Representative Jasmine Crockett's composed expression as she sat straight back, meeting Jordan's glare directly. She had just finished questioning the witness about documented inconsistencies in the chairman's previous statements regarding the investigation. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett responded calmly, "I'm simply asking the witness to address factual discrepancies in the record. If pointing to contradictions in official statements is now considered out of order, perhaps we should clarify the committee's definition of oversight." Jordan's face darkened further. "The gentlewoman will suspend," he insisted, his voice clipped. "Your time has expired, and you've repeatedly violated committee decorum with these political stunts." Crockett adjusted her microphone slightly, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, citing documented inconsistencies isn't a stunt. It's literally the definition of congressional oversight. If we can't question contradictory statements, then we're not conducting oversight. We're hosting political theater." The chamber fell completely silent. Jordan appeared momentarily stunned, clearly not expecting this direct challenge to his authority. Several Republican committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances while Democratic representatives sat forward attentively. In just 30 seconds, what should have been a routine committee exchange had transformed into a direct confrontation about the fundamental nature of congressional oversight itself, one that would soon explode far beyond the hearing room. Representative Jasmine Crockett was not someone who challenged committee chairs without purpose. At 42, the Texas Democrat had built her reputation first as a formidable civil rights attorney who had never lost a case before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, then as a legislator known for her methodical preparation and strategic precision. What many in Washington didn't fully appreciate was her deep reverence for institutional integrity above partisan advantage, a principle shaped by her years defending constitutional protections regardless of her client's political affiliations. Unlike some colleagues who approached hearings with pre-written speeches, Crockett prepared by thoroughly studying committee records, identifying factual inconsistencies, and building evidence-based challenges to flawed narratives. Her legal background had taught her that specific documentation almost always proved more effective than general assertions or partisan talking points. Chairman Jim Jordan represented a starkly different approach to congressional power. A founding member of the Freedom Caucus, known for his combative questioning style and talent for creating viral moments, Jordan had built his national profile as a partisan warrior rather than an institutional steward. His chairmanship had been characterized by investigations that critics claimed prioritized political narratives over factual findings, accusations he dismissed as attempts to undermine legitimate oversight of the Biden administration. The stakes of this confrontation extended far beyond personal conflict. The Judiciary Committee was investigating alleged politicization of federal agencies, a probe with profound implications for public trust in government institutions. Jordan had repeatedly claimed evidence of systematic political bias, while Democrats countered that the investigation itself was politically motivated rather than evidence-based. For millions of Americans watching from home, this hearing represented either essential accountability or partisan theater. Among them was Thomas Miller, a retired federal judge in Ohio who had written to his local newspaper, "Congressional oversight is a constitutional function too important to be reduced to partisan point scoring. When facts become optional, oversight becomes meaningless." This sentiment, concern about the degradation of oversight standards, had begun resonating beyond typical partisan divides. A recent Gallup poll showed 73% of Americans, including majorities of both parties, believed congressional investigations had become more about creating political narratives than finding fact. For Jordan, the hearing represented an opportunity to advance narratives central to his political brand as a fighter against perceived deep state bias. For Crockett, it represented something very different. A chance to demonstrate that effective oversight required factual consistency and institutional respect regardless of partisan advantage. As the chamber remained silent, following her direct challenge to Jordan's conception of oversight, these competing visions hung in the balance. This wasn't merely a clash of personalities or parties. It represented a pivotal moment in defining whether congressional power would serve fact-finding or narrative-building in American governance. "The gentlewoman's commentary on committee procedures is not appropriate," Jordan stated after gathering himself, clearly attempting to reassert control. "We'll move to the next questioner." "Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman," Crockett interjected before Jordan could recognize another member. "Under House Rule 11, on what specific basis am I being ruled out of order?" "My questions to the witness directly related to documented contradictions in official statements about this investigation." This procedural challenge, forcing Jordan to articulate specific grounds rather than general disapproval, created visible discomfort. The parliamentarian leaned over to whisper something to Jordan, whose expression suggested the guidance wasn't what he'd hoped for. "The chair has discretion regarding decorum," Jordan responded, avoiding the specific procedural question. "Representative Boebert is recognized for 5 minutes." "Mr. Chairman, I must insist on a ruling on my parliamentary inquiry," Crockett persisted. "If questioning documented contradictions is now considered a violation of decorum, that represents a fundamental change in this committee's oversight function that should be explicitly stated for the record." The strategic precision of this approach, focusing on procedural rules and institutional standards rather than engaging in personal conflict, was creating visible frustration for Jordan while simultaneously making it difficult for him to dismiss her objections as merely partisan. "The gentlewoman from Texas continues to disrupt these proceedings," Jordan declared, his voice rising again. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that undermines our legitimate oversight efforts." Crockett remained composed. "With respect, Mr. Chairman, what undermines legitimate oversight is selectively enforcing rules based on whether questions support or challenge the majority's preferred narrative. Parliamentary procedure exists precisely to prevent that kind of selective enforcement. This framing, positioning herself as defending institutional integrity against partisan application of rules, was visibly shifting the dynamic in the room. Several moderate Republicans appeared uncomfortable with Jordan's handling of the situation, while the committee's ranking Democrat, Jerry Nadler, was now requesting recognition. "The chair recognizes the ranking member," Jordan stated, perhaps hoping Nadler's intervention would diffuse the situation. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Nadler began. "I believe Representative Crockett has raised a legitimate procedural question. If members can be ruled out of order for questioning inconsistencies in statements central to our investigation, that represents a significant departure from this committee's traditional understanding of oversight. This institutional framing from a senior member emphasizing traditional committee norms rather than partisan interests further elevated the confrontation beyond typical party line disputes." Jordan now faced pressure from multiple directions, with procedural experts and institutional norms aligning against his attempt to silence Crockett's questioning. "The chair appreciates the ranking member's input," Jordan responded with forced patience. "To clarify, members are not prohibited from asking substantive questions, but personal attacks on the chair or other members remain out of order." This attempt to reframe Crockett's factual challenge as a personal attack created the opening she had been waiting for. "Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman," she stated, invoking a procedural rule that takes precedence over most other business. "I must object to the characterization of my questions as personal attacks. I specifically referenced documented contradictions between your April 12th statement that no evidence of political influence was found in agency decisions, and your June 3rd statement that overwhelming evidence of political influence was identified in the same agency actions." She held up both documents. "These are direct quotes from official committee communications. Questioning a factual contradiction is not a personal attack. It's the essence of oversight." The specificity of this evidence, directly quoting contradictory statements with dates and documents rather than making general accusations, created another ripple through the committee room. Several Republican members were now reviewing the documents themselves, comparing the statements Crockett had cited. Jordan, recognizing he was losing control of the narrative, tried another approach. "The gentlewoman is selectively quoting statements made in different contexts about different aspects of the investigation. I am happy to provide the complete context," Mr. Chairman Crockett responded immediately, clearly prepared for this objection. Both statements referred specifically to the EPA regional office decisions we're discussing today. The April statement was made after staff interviews were completed, and the June statement was made without any new witnesses or evidence being introduced. She gestured to her documents. I have the complete transcripts here, which I'd be pleased to enter into the record so all members can evaluate the context for themselves. This offered to provide fuller context rather than selective quotes, effectively countered Jordan's accusation of selective citation while further establishing Crockett's approach as evidence-based rather than merely partisan. The contrast between her specific documented challenge and Jordan's increasingly general defenses was becoming more apparent to everyone in the chamber. Recognizing the shifting dynamic, Representative Matt Gaetz intervened with an attempt to assist Jordan. Mr. Chairman, I move that we table this discussion and return to our scheduled witness questioning. This procedural motion, designed to end debate without resolving the substantive issues Crockett had raised, created yet another inflection point in the rapidly evolving confrontation. Jordan nodded gratefully toward Gaetz. The gentleman from Florida moves to table. All in favor say aye. Point of order, Mr. Chairman, Crockett interjected. Under Rule 6, motions to table are not in order when another member holds the floor on a point of personal privilege which has not been resolved. The parliamentarian, consulted by Jordan, nodded confirmation of this procedural detail. Jordan's frustration was now plainly visible, as another attempt to end the confrontation was procedurally blocked. The gentleman's point of personal privilege is noted, Jordan stated tersely. Now we will return to our scheduled questioning. Mr. Chairman, with respect, a point of personal privilege requires an immediate ruling before other business continues, Crockett persisted. Her knowledge of parliamentary procedure again creating a procedural box that Jordan couldn't easily escape. The tension in the chamber had become palpable, as committee members and staff recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A junior member systematically outmaneuvering a committee, chairman using his own rules and procedures against him all while maintaining a composed, factual approach that made her increasingly difficult to dismiss. It was in this charged atmosphere that Crockett delivered the response that would soon be described as the comeback that broke the internet. A moment that would transform this procedural confrontation into a viral sensation, reflecting broader concerns about institutional integrity in American governance. Mr. Chairman, Crockett said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention. I understand your reluctance to address the contradictions I've identified. But when the chair of a congressional committee can make completely opposite claims about the same evidence within weeks and then rule members out of order for noting that contradiction, we've moved from oversight to theater. She paused, looking directly at Jordan. The American people deserve better than selective enforcement of rules based on whether questions support or challenge the majority's preferred narrative. They deserve oversight based on consistent standards and factual accuracy regardless of which party holds the gavel. The chamber had fallen completely silent as the power of this framing registered with members and observers. By elevating the issue from personal conflict to institutional principles, Crockett had made it nearly impossible for Jordan to dismiss her challenge without appearing to confirm her characterization of selective enforcement. After several seconds that felt much longer, Jordan attempted to reclaim control through procedural means. The committee will take a 10-minute recess, he announced abruptly, bringing down his gavel without waiting for a response. As members began to stir, Crockett delivered the line that would soon dominate social media and news coverage. Mr. Chairman, you can recess the committee, but you can't recess accountability. The contradiction remains in the record whether we're in session or not. This perfectly calibrated response, pointing out that procedural maneuvers couldn't erase factual inconsistencies, captured the essence of the entire exchange in a single quotable line. Several Democratic members nodded in visible appreciation of the precise framing, while even some Republicans appeared to suppress reluctant smiles at the rhetorical effectiveness of the comeback. Jordan, clearly caught off guard by this final riposte, simply gathered his papers and exited the dais without further comment. As members filed out for the recess, journalists were already rushing from the room to file updates on what had quickly become the most discussed committee exchange of the year. Within minutes, Clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media platforms with particular focus on Crockett's final line about recessing the committee but not accountability. What had begun as a procedural dispute in a routine hearing had transformed into a viral moment, illustrating broader tensions between institutional integrity and partisan advantage in congressional oversight. By the time the committee reconvened 10 minutes later, "Can't recess accountability and oversight, not theater?" were already trending nationally on Twitter, with legal experts and political commentators across the spectrum analyzing the extraordinary exchange. By evening, the confrontation had exploded far beyond typical political circles. The clip of Crockett's recess accountability response had been viewed over 20 million times across platforms, with commentators focusing not just on the quotable comeback, but on the substantive issue of consistent standards in congressional oversight. What made this exchange extraordinary wasn't just the clever retort, noted former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh on CNN. It was watching a member systematically use procedural knowledge and specific documentation to uphold institutional standards against partisan application of rules. That's something members of both parties should appreciate. Even conservative outlets typically aligned with Jordan struggled to frame the exchange favorably. On Fox News, former Congressman Trey Gowdy acknowledged, "When you're presented with your own contradictory statements, attacking the questioner procedurally rather than addressing the substance rarely ends well. The chairman would have been better served directly addressing the apparent contradiction." For Jordan personally, the political fallout materialized quickly. His office issued a statement attempting to provide context for the contradictory statements Crockett had highlighted, claiming they referred to different aspects of the investigation examined at different stages. However, this explanation was undermined when multiple news organizations published the full transcripts, confirming they indeed referred to the same agency decisions as Crockett had stated. More significantly, Jordan's handling of the confrontation raised concerns among Republican colleagues about his effectiveness as chairman. According to Politico, several moderate Republicans expressed private frustration about being blindsided by the contradictions Crockett had exposed. "No one likes walking into a hearing unprepared for documented inconsistencies in our own chairman's statements," an anonymous Republican committee member told the outlet. "It makes the entire investigation look politically motivated rather than fact-based, which undermines our legitimate oversight objectives." This institutional concern materialized in concrete form 3 days later when the committee quietly released new guidelines requiring review of all official statements before publication to ensure factual consistency and accuracy across committee communications. While the document never mentioned Jordan by name, Capitol Hill insiders recognized it as a direct response to the issues Crockett had exposed. For Crockett, the aftermath brought both professional recognition and increased responsibility as media requests poured in. She maintained the same measured institution-focused approach that had characterized her committee performance, consistently framing the issue around oversight standards rather than personal or partisan conflict. "This isn't about any individual member or party," she told Rachel Maddow. "It's about whether congressional oversight serves truth-finding or narrative-building. The American people deserve consistent standards regardless of which party holds the gavel." When asked about her preparation for the confrontation, Crockett credited her background as a trial attorney. "In court, you learn that specific evidence and procedural knowledge almost always trump general assertions or emotional appeals. I approach this, as I would any legal challenge, with thorough documentation and precise citation of relevant rules." This framing, elevating institutional integrity above partisan advantage, resonated beyond typical political audiences. An unexpected consequence emerged in the form of increased public interest in congressional procedures and oversight standards. The House Committee on Rules reported a 287% increase in visits to their online procedural resources in the week following the hearing, suggesting citizens were taking a more active interest in how congressional power is exercised and constrained. Perhaps most significantly, the confrontation catalyzed broader discussions about the purpose and standards of congressional investigations. Several respected former committee chairs from both parties published a joint op-ed in the Washington Post calling for a return to fact-based oversight that prioritizes consistent Evidentiary standards over partisan narrative building. This push for structural reform rather than merely partisan advantage reflected the most lasting impact of the Jordan-Crockett confrontation. By focusing on documented contradictions and procedural consistency rather than engaging in personal attacks or partisan talking points, Crockett had shifted the conversation from who should conduct oversight to how oversight should function in a healthy democracy. For Americans like Thomas Miller, the retired federal judge who had expressed concern about oversight standards, the incident represented a rare moment when institutional integrity transcended partisan division. For once, we saw a member of Congress defending consistent standards rather than just partisan advantage, he told his local Ohio newspaper. That's how the system is supposed to work. His sentiment, appreciation for principle over partisanship, reflected perhaps the most significant legacy of the confrontation. In an era of deep political division, Crockett had demonstrated that appeals to institutional integrity and factual consistency could still resonate across partisan lines, creating accountability moments that strengthen democratic governance rather than further eroding it. As one congressional scholar observed in The Atlantic in methodically exposing contradictions while defending consistent standards, Representative Crockett didn't just deliver a memorable comeback. She offered a masterclass in what congressional oversight is supposed to be. By prioritizing institutional integrity over partisan advantage, she reminded Americans across the political spectrum that effective governance requires more than viral moments. It demands factual consistency and procedural fairness regardless of which party holds power. Call to action. This story highlights how knowledge of procedures and commitment to consistent standards can create meaningful accountability in our democratic institutions. But fostering evidence-based governance requires ongoing engagement from all of us, not just those in elected office. If this story resonated with you, here are 3 things you can do right now. 1. Learn about congressional procedures yourself. Visit House Gov Park committees or Senate Gov Park committees to access committee rules and procedures. Understanding how these bodies are supposed to function makes it easier to identify when rules are being applied selectively or inconsistently. The more citizens who understand these procedures, the harder it becomes to misuse them for partisan advantage. 2. Support organizations promoting institutional integrity. Groups like the Project on Government Oversight, POGO, Issue 1, and the Congressional Management Foundation work to strengthen congressional capacity and accountability across party lines. Consider following their work or supporting similar nonpartisan initiatives that focus on how Congress functions rather than which party controls it. 3. Subscribe to our channel for ongoing coverage of congressional oversight and institutional accountability beyond partisan talking points. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our follow-up reporting on evolving standards for evidence in congressional investigations. Remember, what we witnessed between Representatives Crockett and Jordan demonstrates that our democracy works best when consistent standards and factual accuracy take precedence over partisan advantage. Regardless of your political leanings, supporting institutional integrity strengthens the governance systems we all depend upon. What was your reaction to seeing how knowledge of procedures and commitment to consistent standards created accountability in this congressional hearing? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know what other aspects of government accountability you'd like us to explore in future.